All right, welcome back to Black and Blue Garage. I have got this Jeep running by Christmas, which was my goal. I did all the lights and the license plate and everything to make this street legal. Drove it down to the gas station. Everything's working fine, but there's some reliability issues that I need to take care of. And I'm trying to get this now. My new goal for 2025 is to get this Jeep ready for Easter Jeep Safari, if I can make it down there. There's a trail ride that I'd like to go on in Utah, and then there's a couple other trails here locally that I'd like to do with some buddies. So I think the first thing that needs to be done, most importantly, is cooling. And so I used, if you remember, I used 1.5-inch copper tubing, which is 1 5/8 on the outside diameter or something like that. And so there's a couple of spots throughout the frame where this is just resting on sheet metal, which is not good, if you can imagine. So I need to secure these tubes somehow, but also protect them from the sheet metal where it passes through the cab and bed of this truck. And I'm thinking that if I half a piece of 1.5 inch, I can half it, long ways. I can hose clamp that around the tube where it goes through there, and then once I clamp everything up, if it does have an issue where this is resting on sheet metal, it'll actually ride on the PVC instead of the copper tubing and spring a leak. So now for that moment I've been waiting for, I want it to be nice and snug around the copper tube so that it doesn't have a whole lot of vibration. And I'm okay with it having a bit of a gap right there, as long as it's going to protect this copper tube from any abrasions and holes and vibrations and stuff. I think that'll work pretty good. By the way, my dad showed me this. If you've got some crumbs on plastic, you could take the blade at kind of an angle and just scrape them off. Instead of trying to go like this and cut into the plastic, just scrapes them off nice. Leaves you with a nice finish. Just kind of like these nice little shavings. So I'm just going to put this over the pipe, shove it through the hole, and then on either end I'll just put a couple of these hose clamps on, and that'll be done with that portion of this build. Now I'm not going to get my grinder out to cut some plastic. That would be a big mess, and it would decrease the inner diameter of this tube when I'm done. But I do have a Dremel, and I think in order to make this a little easier to cut, I'm going to get that out and slice down the middle. Alright, so now that we've already made a mess, gosh, I wish I need to really do my lights in here, but now that we've already made a mess on the counter, which I just cleaned it up, but we made a mess of the entire interior of this cab, so I'm going to clean that up a little bit, and then I'll show you what I'm working with and how I'm going to mount these tubes up. So after putting those copper tubes through the back of the cab using the PVC, those tubes are insulated and run all the way down on the bottom of the cab and then up through the firewall above the inner fender. That brings us to the front. You can see where it comes out of the firewall above the fender here. And then I've got an extra fill cap here. I'll probably add one to this side just so that I could release the air bubbles as I'm filling this. This hose here, which by the way, I got a video about this killer glass coolant tube, which is pretty cool. Water is brown right now because I just have water in there. But this tube needs to be held up. And so I think if I just make a bracket on the front side that will bolt onto this front clip support and hold this, there's even a hole right there where I do it. I think that'll solve my one last issue with this coolant system, other than bleeding it, of course, and putting some actual coolant. So let me show you. I have got two schools of thought on that process. One, I have this coolant tube. I could make a bracket and, you know, bend stuff and take the whole day making something special. But this is a clamp used for chain link fences, for 1 5/8 posts, upright posts for chain link fences. So you can take pre-made chain link fences and clip them all together to make whatever temporary enclosure that you want, like they use on construction sites. Just so happens that this 1.5 inch copper tube is 1 5/8 on the outside, so this will actually fit. And it's designed to where you could take bigger tubes and smaller tubes and put them together, but in general it's like that size. So I bought those. I actually had to buy like 20 of them, but they were pretty cheap. First school of thought is to use this like this and cut up a rubber inner tube to insulate the galvanized metal and the copper tube, as not only do you not want metal on metal. I think somebody told me that galvanized, the zinc or whatever in galvanized metal is bad for copper tube and it'll make each other corrode. But since the PVC pipe works so good in the back of the cab, it's insulating the copper tube from the sheet metal, I decided to try this out, and this actually fits even better. And this I think is like 1 3/4 inch outside diameter. So if I insulated the copper tube and this galvanized with this, just like I did at the back of the cab just now, that would work perfect. Then all we got to do is figure out how to modify this back piece so where I could put a spacer and a bolt and hang this off that front clip. So that's what I'm gonna try to do. Yeah, there we go, that's what I need. I've got 40 halves of these, so if I screw it up I can start over. Alright, well, that's not bad. Now I got flat side, round side. Let's see if we do this. Clamp this up and drill a hole, and we're in business. I know my shop is a mess. You don't have to say anything. Had this house for 2 years, still not really moved in yet. Okay, that's tight. I got good clearance everywhere. But that worked out pretty good. I kind of like that it has a little bit of flex in it. I'm going to monitor this to make sure I'm not getting any cracking or something, or rubbing up here, because it is about 3/8 of an inch too close to this, I think. But I think that's going to do just fine. So as far as coolant goes, the only thing left to do is to add some bleeder valves to this end of it. So I'm going to do that later. So aside from some vent valves in the front two hoses just to help to bleed the coolant system a little bit better, The coolant system is just about done. I've got to do the same kind of bracket in the back for one of the tubes as I did in the front, just so that it's not, you know, flopping up and down and smacking the bottom of the bed. So the next project that I want to do today is I need to take this interior apart a little bit and cover a hole on the transmission hump where this truck was originally standard and now it's an automatic, and so I've got to cover up a big hole. I made half of a transmission hump out here out of some galvanized sheet metal that I found. I put some foam around the edge so that it'll seal nice and good, and then once I've got this all in, I'm gonna probably do some Dynamat later to help to lower up some exhaust noise, which is pointing right down from underneath the cab. So I'm gonna install these, and then once I've got these holes covered up as good as I want over where the transmission is, there's a couple other holes that I want to finish up, and I think I've got a cool idea, so I'll be right back. Alright, I got this galvanized sheet. I ended up making this cover in 2 pieces. That way, it'll be easier to remove with just an 1/8 inch drill, and I don't have to worry about a grommet for that transfer case shifter cable, because it just gets sandwiched between those 2 galvanized sheets and some foam strip that you saw earlier. So I also have a hole down here that I cut in order to access some hoses and the top of the exhaust. I want to make an actual panel that's removable with bolts on this instead of like cover it up temporarily with some rivets. And that I'll have to get into a little bit later, because right now, while I have access through that hole, I want to get the transmission cooler done, and also make sure that the exhaust bolts are all tight, and then I'll go ahead and make a cover for that. And then the cab floor will be done, aside from doing some sound deadening or finish painting it all with bed liner. So let's get to it. What I've got here is a couple of these transmission coolers. This is one of those coolers that you do with those straight zip ties to your radiator in the front, but since I have the radiator in the back with the fan back there, I want to just do the same thing. But because I'm going to be using a 4L60 to do some off-road stuff, and I may be like propped up on a rock for a long time, heating up my torque converter, trying to get up a hill or a rock or whatever, I'm actually going to take 2 of these and string them together in series. And I've also got my little temperature gauge here, which I'm going to put at the radiator or at either at the radiator or in line at the transmission, and that way I can know how hot my transmission's getting. The idea is to connect these two, so you're basically doubling the capacity, so your fluid line comes in the bottom, which pushes the air out of the top. It loops back and forth and then comes out here and back to your transmission. Find the right fitting. I know I've got a U-shaped one. I could do, what can I do? This was the shortest AN line I made. Now I'm gonna make one that's super short. Put about 2 inches, that way it leaves us enough room to get the rest of that on there. Safety shield, just in case. In case you're wondering, I'm cutting this AN line using a blade. It's like, they come in like 3/4 inch diameters, and I've been cutting all my AN lines with that, and it makes a pretty clean cut. Screw this fitting onto the hose, which is reverse thread. You want to do that until you see the rubber down in there meet the threads. And lighting is horrible, so it's not going to focus or anything, but you get the idea. Then take the fitting with the threads on it and screw that in there, and that kind of locks the two together. When you're making AN lines of any length, you want to make sure that you hold on to the hose part and screw the fitting in, not this not the nut that clamps them both together, because if you hold right here, you could be spinning the hose and pushing it out of this, and you don't get a good seal. So you want to hold the hose, make sure that's not spinning, and then you want to tighten the fitting into the hose. Once you're sure that it's going into the hose, they make a special pair of jaws so that you don't scratch up all your AN lines. This one's going to be somewhere no one's going to look, but at the same time, you could just use a rag or a paper towel between the fitting, and that will protect it for the most part. Here at Black and Blue Garage, I don't really care that much how it looks. I mean, at first it's nice to make a pretty truck, but I mean, the goal is to go out and abuse it and get it scratched up, right? Okay, so now that I've got the shortest hose I've ever made, I can go ahead and tighten that onto Shaw. And there you go, I just doubled the capacity. It's 100% not perfect. To attach this, I've got these kind of zip ties that came with these coolers. And although this is not everybody's favorite, I'm just going to put a bunch of these, and if it ever comes off, then I'll come up with something else. In my opinion, the #1 cause of a 4L60 failing is because of overheating. I don't have any science to back that up, but it will burn up all your clutches and plates if you, oh, it's dripping. All right. Now it's time to stick this on the radiator. So I made this fan shroud out of a street sign, and so it's reflective and aluminum. And if you'd like to see how I did that, I'll drop a link to the video in the description below. 4 screws. That fan comes right off, and then so this zip tie zip right to the back. So I think for starters, I'll put one right in this corner right here. I hope I'm doing this right. If I'm not, you can yell at me. I know a lot of people don't like these things. It does cover up a square inch of cooling surface. Hopefully nobody will be mad at me. And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this spring. I think I'm just gonna leave it off. I can't cut these too short because they'll all lose their grip. Alright, it's on. I put the fan back on. Just like this. Got to hook up my transmission to the transmission cooler, and that project will be done. So I secured my coolant tubes, and I finished my transmission cooler and covered the shifting hole. So that's a lot for today, and it's not even, you know, 1 o'clock, so pushing on to the next project. I think I'm gonna wrap it up for today. I got about 6 or 7 more days of working on this Jeep spread out over the next 3 months. So thanks for watching, God bless, and I'll see you next weekend. See you later. It's 100% not perfect.